Have you ever noticed that the more you react, the more power you give to those who hurt you? Seneca, advisor to Roman emperors, taught that there exists a psychological weapon so powerful it can completely dismantle anyone who tried to destroy you, and you don't need to say a single word. It's the same technique he used to survive the betrayals of the imperial court, transforming your indifference into an impenetrable mental fortress. Today you'll learn how to activate this 2,000-year-old psychological shield that makes your enemies question their own existence. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where in the world you're watching from, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Have you ever wondered why some relationships seem effortless while others require constant work? The psychology behind positive relationships reveals fascinating insights about human connection that affect every interaction we have. Whether romantic partnerships, friendships, family bonds, or professional relationships, certain psychological principles consistently appear in healthy connections. Understanding these elements not only helps us recognize good relationships, but also gives us tools to improve the ones we already have. Healthy communication forms the absolute foundation of any strong relationship. When we communicate effectively, we create a bridge between our inner world and someone else's. This isn't simply about talking more, it's about the quality of our exchanges. Active listening plays a crucial role here. This means truly focusing on what the other person is saying, rather than just waiting for your turn to speak. When someone feels genuinely heard, it creates immediate psychological safety. We can demonstrate active listening by maintaining eye contact, nodding appropriately, and paraphrasing what we've heard to confirm understanding. Clear expression is the flip side of this communication coin. Many relationship problems stem from unexpressed expectations or needs. Being direct yet compassionate allows us to share our thoughts without creating defensiveness. I feel statements work particularly well because they focus on personal experience rather than accusation. For example, saying, "I feel overwhelmed when there are dirty dishes piled up," lands much better than "you never clean up after yourself." This subtle shift keeps communication channels open rather than triggering the other person's defenses. Trust building requires consistency and vulnerability between people over extended periods of time. Trust isn't built in a day. It accumulates through repeated experiences of reliability and honesty. Each time we do what we say we'll do, we place another brick in the foundation of trust. Conversely, broken promises or dishonesty can damage trust disproportionately to how long it took to build. Psychologists often note that trust operates on what they call a slow-to-build, quick-to-break principle. Vulnerability plays an equally important role in developing trust. When we share our authentic thoughts, feelings, and experiences, we signal that we trust the other person with our true selves. This invitation often encourages reciprocal openness. However, vulnerability requires discernment, sharing appropriate details at suitable times rather than overwhelming someone with immediate and complete disclosure. The gradual exchange of increasingly personal information creates a healthy rhythm of growing closeness. Conflict resolution skills transform disagreements into opportunities for deeper understanding and growth. Conflict itself isn't inherently negative. It's how we handle it that determines whether it strengthens or damages a relationship. Productive conflict involves focusing on the issue at hand rather than attacking character. When disagreements arise, psychologically healthy relationships maintain respect even during heated moments. Specific techniques can help navigate conflict effectively. Taking short breaks when emotions run high allows the brain's logical centers to re-engage. Using both-and thinking rather than either-or thinking opens possibilities for compromise. For example, instead of debating whether to save money or take a vacation, the question becomes how to take a meaningful vacation while still being financially responsible. This approach acknowledges the validity of both perspectives. Emotional intelligence plays a crucial role in recognizing both one's own feelings and those of others in the relationship. This multifaceted skill includes identifying emotions accurately, understanding their causes and implications, and managing emotional responses appropriately. People with higher emotional intelligence tend to have more satisfying relationships because they can navigate the complex emotional landscapes that exist between people. Developing emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness. Taking time to check in with our feelings throughout the day builds our emotional vocabulary beyond basic labels like good or bad. More nuanced recognition allows us to communicate our emotional states more precisely and address the actual causes rather than symptoms. Similarly, recognizing emotional patterns in others helps us respond appropriately to their needs, even when they haven't explicitly stated them. Boundaries serve as essential guidelines that promote respect and personal autonomy within relationships. Contrary to popular misconception, healthy boundaries don't create distance, they create clarity. When both people understand expectations, preferences, and limits, they can interact more confidently without fear of overstepping or being taken advantage of. Boundaries range from physical, personal space, touch preferences, to emotional, topics that are off limits, appropriate times for serious discussions, to digital, response time expectations, social media sharing. Setting boundaries requires clarity and consistency. Vague boundaries lead to unintentional violations and resentment. Clearly expressed boundaries sound like, "I need 30 minutes to decompress after work before discussing household matters," or "I'm comfortable sharing our relationship status, but prefer not to post private conversations online." Enforcing boundaries consistently teaches others what we truly value and need. Cultivating gratitude and appreciation creates a positive atmosphere that strengthens interpersonal bonds. Research consistently shows that relationships flourish when positive interactions outnumber negative ones by a ratio of at least 5-1. Expressions of appreciation contribute significantly to this positive balance. When we actively look for things to appreciate, we train our attention to notice the good rather than fixating on problems. Specific appreciation works better than general compliments. Instead of a generic "thanks for your help," saying, "I really appreciated how you remembered that detail about the project that everyone else missed," acknowledges the unique contribution. This specificity shows that we're truly paying attention to the other person's actions and qualities. Regular expressions of gratitude create an upward spiral of positive feeling and reciprocation. Repair attempts after disagreements or hurts determine relationship longevity more accurately than the frequency of conflict itself. Every relationship experiences ruptures, misunderstandings, disappointed expectations, or hurtful exchanges. The difference between lasting relationships and failed ones often comes down to successful repair. This involves sincere apology, taking responsibility without defensiveness, and concrete actions to prevent similar hurts in the future. Successful repair requires emotional regulation from both parties. The person who caused hurt must manage defensiveness, while the hurt person must be willing to move toward forgiveness when genuine remorse is expressed. This delicate dance demonstrates commitment to the relationship over being right or nursing grudges. Shared meaning and purpose create resilient bonds that withstand challenges. Relationships thrive when people build a sense of we-ness. Shared goals, values, rituals, or traditions that define their unique connection. For some, this might involve religious practices or cultural traditions. For others, it might be shared hobbies, parenting philosophies, or volunteering for causes they both believe in. This common ground provides stability during difficult times and enhances joy during good ones. Creating shared meaning happens through intentional conversations about values and priorities, as well as through the accumulation of shared experiences. Something as simple as a Sunday morning coffee ritual or an annual camping trip can become a meaningful thread in the fabric of a relationship. The psychology of positive relationships reveals that healthy connections don't happen by accident. They require awareness, intention, and consistent effort. By focusing on communication, trust, conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, boundaries, and appreciation, we create the conditions for relationships to flourish. These elements work together as an integrated system, each supporting and enhancing the others. When we understand these psychological principles, we gain both the insight to recognize healthy relationships and the tools to nurture them. While these psychological principles form the foundation of our personal relationships, they also extend into our professional interactions and even into the broader marketplace. Businesses and marketers who understand the psychology of positive relationships often apply these same principles when connecting with consumers. This brings us to the fascinating world of ethical persuasion in business and marketing, where the best practitioners build genuine connections rather than manipulative ones. Have you ever noticed how some companies make you feel valued while others leave you feeling manipulated? The difference often comes down to ethical persuasion versus manipulation. Ethical persuasion in business involves influencing customers' decisions while respecting their autonomy, providing genuine value, and maintaining transparency. It's about building sustainable relationships rather than securing one-time transactions through deceptive means. Transparent communication stands at the heart of ethical persuasion, just as it does in personal relationships. When businesses communicate honestly about their products, pricing, and policies, they build consumer trust and establish long-term brand loyalty. This transparency includes being forthright about product limitations, potential drawbacks, or situations where a competitor might actually offer a better solution for certain needs. While this level of honesty might seem counterintuitive to traditional sales approaches, it creates something much more valuable than a single sale: customer trust. Consider how companies handle product issues or service failures. Those practicing ethical persuasion acknowledge problems quickly, explain what happened in understandable terms, and outline concrete steps they're taking to resolve the situation. This approach mirrors the repair attempts we discussed in healthy personal relationships. By contrast, businesses that hide information, use confusing jargon, or bury important details in fine print might gain short-term advantages, but ultimately erode customer confidence. Value-based selling represents another cornerstone of ethical persuasion. This approach focuses on genuinely solving customer problems rather than using manipulative tactics. Instead of pressuring prospects with artificial scarcity or misleading claims, value-based selling begins with understanding customer needs and demonstrating how a product or service genuinely addresses those needs. The conversation centers on the customer's situation rather than the seller's quotas or incentives. This customer-centered approach requires authentic listening skills, another parallel to personal relationship psychology. Sales professionals practicing ethical persuasion ask thoughtful questions, seek to understand underlying needs, and sometimes even recommend against a purchase if it truly doesn't serve the customer. This counterintuitive approach often leads to stronger long-term customer relationships and referrals, even if it means occasionally losing an immediate sale. Ethical storytelling connects audiences to brands through authentic narratives that resonate with shared values. Stories have always been powerful vehicles for persuasion because they engage both emotional and rational processing in ways that raw data cannot. However, the difference between ethical and manipulative storytelling lies in authenticity and purpose. Ethical brand stories reflect genuine company values, actual customer experiences, and realistic portrayals of how products fit into people's lives. Take companies that share the real stories of product development, including the setbacks and failures along the way. This vulnerability, similar to what builds trust in personal relationships, creates authentic connections with audiences. Contrast this with manipulative approaches that fabricate problems, exaggerate benefits, or create false urgency through manufactured narratives. While both approaches use storytelling techniques, only one builds sustainable trust. Social proof represents a powerful persuasion principle that can be used either ethically or manipulatively. At its core, social proof leverages our natural tendency to look to others for guidance when making decisions. Ethical use of social proof involves sharing genuine customer experiences and testimonials. This means featuring real, verifiable reviews that include both positives and constructive criticism, using actual customer photos rather than stock images, and presenting realistic outcomes rather than exceptional results. The ethical difference becomes clear when comparing approaches to testimonials. Companies practicing ethical persuasion seek balanced feedback, represent diverse customer experiences, and avoid editing reviews to remove legitimate criticisms. They might share how many customers returned products alongside how many were satisfied. This honesty actually strengthens persuasion because it builds credibility. When a company acknowledges drawbacks, consumers are more likely to believe the positives. Reciprocity principles work best when offering actual value before expecting customer commitment. The psychological principle of reciprocity, our natural inclination to return favors, influences many marketing strategies. Ethical businesses provide genuine value through helpful content, useful free tools, or meaningful samples without manipulative conditions. The key distinction is whether the gift truly benefits the recipient, regardless of whether they make a purchase. For example, a software company might offer a genuinely useful free version of their product, educational resources that help solve problems, or a consultation that provides value even if the prospect doesn't buy. This approach contrasts with tactics like free offers with hidden catches, artificially inflated prices followed by special discounts, or gifts that create social pressure rather than provide real value. The ethical approach recognizes that genuine generosity often naturally inspires reciprocity without manipulation. Respecting consumer autonomy means providing clear information and avoiding pressure tactics. Ethical persuasion acknowledges that the final decision always belongs to the customer and works to ensure that decision is well-informed rather than pressured. This respect manifests in clear opt-out mechanisms, straightforward cancellation policies, and balanced presentation of options. Consider how ethical businesses handle the checkout process. They clearly display all costs, including shipping, taxes, and fees, before asking for payment information. They make subscription terms clear and cancellation processes simple. They avoid pre-checked boxes that add unwanted products or services. These practices respect customer agency rather than trying to circumvent conscious decision-making. Choice architecture represents a particularly interesting area where ethical and unethical persuasion diverge. How options are presented significantly influences decisions. But ethical businesses use this knowledge to help customers make better choices rather than to manipulate them. For instance, an ethical company might highlight environmentally sustainable options, but still make conventional alternatives easily accessible, providing information about trade-offs without judgment. Contrast this with manipulative designs that hide important information, create false comparisons, or make unwanted options deliberately difficult to decline. The ethical approach uses design to clarify and inform rather than confuse or mislead. This respect for customer intelligence builds stronger relationships and often leads to greater loyalty over time. The language of persuasion also reflects ethical considerations. Ethical marketers use clear, accurate descriptions and avoid hyperbolic claims like revolutionary, miraculous, or guaranteed unless they can be substantiated. They're careful with absolute terms like always or never and provide specific evidence for claims. This linguistic integrity mirrors the honest communication that builds trust in personal relationships. Even when using persuasive techniques like emotional appeals, ethical marketers ensure the emotions evoked connect authentically to the actual customer experience with the product. Creating artificial fear to sell security products or promising happiness that a product cannot reasonably deliver crosses the line into manipulation. Ethical emotional appeals align with genuine emotional benefits the product can realistically provide. Time-based persuasion tactics require particular ethical attention. Limited time offers can provide legitimate value when they reflect genuine constraints like seasonal availability or actual inventory limitations. However, creating false scarcity through countdown timers that reset for each visitor or claiming limited availability when products are plentiful constitutes manipulation rather than ethical persuasion. Personalization represents another double-edged sword in modern marketing. Ethical personalization uses customer data to provide genuinely more relevant experiences while being transparent about data collection and giving customers control over their information. This contrasts with invasive tracking that occurs without clear consent or meaningful opt-out options. The ethical approach recognizes that convenience must be balanced with privacy and transparency. The long-term business benefits of ethical persuasion are substantial. Beyond avoiding regulatory problems or public relations disasters, ethical persuasion builds sustainable customer relationships, encourages word-of-mouth advocacy, and creates internal cultures where employees feel proud of their work. Companies practicing ethical persuasion often enjoy lower customer acquisition costs, higher retention rates, and stronger brand equity, proving that doing right by customers ultimately does right by the business. For consumers, recognizing the difference between ethical persuasion and manipulation provides protection against making regretted decisions. Being aware of common manipulation tactics helps people make choices aligned with their actual needs, rather than responding to artificial pressure. This awareness doesn't mean becoming cynical about all marketing. It means appreciating businesses that respect your intelligence and truly seek to provide value. The psychology of ethical persuasion ultimately circles back to the same principles that sustain healthy personal relationships: respect, honesty, mutual benefit, and genuine connection. When businesses embrace these principles, marketing becomes less about tricks and techniques and more about building meaningful relationships with the people they serve. In both personal connections and commercial interactions, lasting success comes from creating genuine value rather than the illusion of it. In this increasingly connected marketplace, consumers need tools to distinguish genuine value from illusions. This discernment doesn't develop automatically. It requires specific skills that extend far beyond simple technological proficiency. As our lives become increasingly intertwined with digital platforms, apps, and online information sources, the ability to navigate this landscape intelligently has become as essential as traditional literacy was in previous generations. Welcome to the world of digital literacy in the information age. Have you ever wondered why some people seem immune to online scams while others repeatedly fall victim? Or why certain individuals can quickly determine if news is trustworthy while others share misinformation without hesitation? The difference often comes down to digital literacy, a comprehensive set of skills that enables people to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information effectively in our digital environment. Critical evaluation of online sources requires examining credentials, methodology, and potential biases. In a world where anyone can publish content that looks professional, the ability to assess information quality has never been more important. This skill begins with basic source verification, checking who created the content and their qualifications or expertise. Does the author have relevant credentials? Is the publishing organization reputable? What evidence suggests they're knowledgeable about this specific topic? Beyond credentials, digitally literate individuals examine methodology, how information was gathered and processed. Was the research conducted properly? Are claims supported by evidence? For statistical information, were appropriate sample sizes used? Is the data recent enough to be relevant? These questions help determine whether information rests on solid foundations or shaky assumptions. Perhaps most challenging is identifying bias in online sources. All content reflects some perspective, but bias becomes problematic when it significantly distorts information without transparency. Digital literacy involves recognizing both obvious and subtle forms of bias, from overtly partisan news sites to more nuanced issues like selection bias, in which facts are presented and which are omitted. Looking for emotional language, checking if alternative viewpoints are fairly represented, and seeking coverage from multiple perspectives helps create a more complete picture. This critical evaluation isn't about cynically rejecting all information. Rather, it's about developing a healthy skepticism that questions before accepting and seeks verification before sharing. It means recognizing that information quality exists on a spectrum, rather than in simple categories of fake or real. Some sources may be generally reliable but have occasional errors, while others might mix accurate information with misleading conclusions. Understanding algorithm functionality helps users recognize how their digital experiences are shaped. Many people don't realize that what they see online is heavily filtered and personalized by complex algorithms. These algorithms determine which social media posts appear in your feed, which search results rank highest, which products are recommended, and even which news stories reach you. They create what some researchers call filter bubbles, personalized information environments that can limit exposure to diverse perspectives. These algorithms typically optimize for engagement, showing content likely to keep you scrolling, clicking, or watching. They learn from your behavior, creating feedback loops that can amplify certain types of content while making others nearly invisible. For example, if you watch several videos about a particular topic, video platforms will recommend increasingly similar content, potentially leading to more extreme versions of the same ideas. Digital literacy involves understanding this filtering process and taking steps to diversify information exposure. This might mean occasionally using private browsing modes for searches, following sources with different perspectives, or deliberately seeking out viewpoints that challenge your existing beliefs. It also means recognizing that popularity and prominence in search results don't necessarily indicate accuracy or quality. Privacy management skills enable individuals to make informed choices about their personal data. Every digital interaction generates data, from obvious activities like posting on social media to less visible ones like how long you pause while reading an article or which items you hover over while shopping online. This data is collected, aggregated, analyzed, and often sold to create detailed profiles used for targeting advertisements and content. Digitally literate individuals understand what information they're sharing, with whom, and for what purposes. This begins with basic privacy hygiene, using strong, unique passwords for different accounts, enabling two-factor authentication for important services, and regularly reviewing privacy settings on devices and applications. It extends to more nuanced decisions, like whether to use loyalty programs that track purchasing behavior, or whether to permit location tracking on mobile apps. Understanding privacy policies, though often lengthy and complex, provides insights into how your data might be used. Digital literacy includes knowing that free services typically involve payment through personal data rather than money. It means recognizing the trade-offs involved in convenience versus privacy and making intentional decisions rather than simply accepting default settings. Media creation literacy involves both technical skills and ethical considerations about content impact. As digital tools make content creation increasingly accessible, more people are becoming publishers, videographers, podcasters, and influencers. Creating responsible digital content requires understanding both how to use these tools effectively and how to consider the potential consequences of what you share. On the technical side, this includes basics like capturing clear images or audio, editing content for clarity, and understanding how different platforms optimize for different formats. It also involves more sophisticated skills like verifying information before including it in your content, providing proper attribution for sources, and understanding copyright and fair use principles. The ethical dimension involves considering how your content might affect others. Will sharing certain information potentially harm vulnerable individuals? Could your content be taken out of context or misused? Are you inadvertently spreading misinformation? Digital literacy means recognizing that content creation carries responsibility, especially as social media can amplify messages far beyond their intended audience. Online communication norms vary across platforms and require adaptability and cultural awareness. Each digital space has its own unwritten rules and expectations. What's appropriate on LinkedIn differs dramatically from what works on TikTok or in a professional email. Understanding these context-specific norms helps prevent misunderstandings and ensures messages are received as intended. These norms include platform-specific etiquette like appropriate response times, use of emoji or abbreviations, and expected formality levels. They extend to cultural considerations in global communications, where direct versus indirect communication styles or attitudes toward hierarchy may vary significantly. Digital literacy means recognizing these differences and adapting communication approaches accordingly. Tone and intent are particularly challenging to convey in text-based communication, which lacks the nonverbal cues we rely on in face-to-face interactions. Digitally literate communicators are mindful of how messages might be interpreted and use strategies like explicitly stating intentions, avoiding all caps, which can read as shouting, and being thoughtful about humor that might not translate across cultural contexts. Digital well-being practices help balance the benefits of technology with necessary offline experiences. As digital tools become increasingly integrated into daily life, maintaining healthy boundaries becomes essential. Digital literacy includes recognizing technology's impacts on physical and mental health and developing strategies to mitigate negative effects. This begins with awareness of how digital habits affect sleep, posture, eye strain, and physical activity. Simple practices like using night mode in evening hours, positioning screens at appropriate heights, taking regular breaks to focus on distant objects, and creating tech-free times for physical activity can significantly improve well-being. Mental health considerations are equally important. The constant connectivity enabled by smartphones can create pressure to be always available, while social media's curated presentations of others' lives can trigger unhealthy comparisons. Notification systems designed to capture attention can fragment focus and increase stress levels. Digital literacy involves recognizing these effects and implementing boundaries like designated offline periods, selective notification settings, and mindful consumption of potentially triggering content. Perhaps most important is developing awareness of how digital tools affect attention and cognitive processes. Research suggests that constant task switching and information streams may reduce capacity for sustained attention and deep thinking. Digitally literate individuals create environments conducive to different types of cognitive work, perhaps allowing notifications during collaborative projects, but blocking distractions during activities requiring focused concentration. Information management strategies help prevent feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of digital content. These include techniques like using bookmarking systems to save valuable resources for later review, setting up information filters to prioritize important communications, and developing routines for processing different types of information. Rather than attempting to consume everything, digital literacy involves making strategic decisions about what deserves attention. The social dimension of digital literacy recognizes that online interactions affect real human relationships. This includes understanding how to maintain meaningful connections through digital channels while still prioritizing in-person interactions. It means recognizing when a conversation has become too complex for text and should move to voice or video. It involves being intentional about social media use, using it to enhance rather than replace direct communication. Digital literacy represents a crucial adaptation to our information-rich environment. Just as traditional literacy opened doors to knowledge through books, digital literacy provides access to the vast resources of our connected world while helping navigate its challenges. It's not about rejecting technology, but about engaging with it intentionally and skillfully. As with any form of literacy, these skills develop through practice, reflection, and continued learning. Digital environments evolve rapidly, requiring ongoing adaptation rather than a one-time mastery. By developing these capabilities, we transform from passive consumers of digital content to active, discerning participants who can harness technology's benefits while minimizing its potential harms. The active engagement we develop through digital literacy naturally extends beyond our online environments to how we interact with the physical world around us. As we become more conscious digital citizens, many people find themselves asking similar questions about their material consumption and environmental impact. This growing awareness has sparked renewed interest in sustainable living practices, practical approaches to daily life that reduce environmental harm while often improving personal well-being and financial health. Have you ever wondered what actually happens to your trash after it leaves your home? Or considered how much energy your household uses compared to what it truly needs? These questions form the starting point for many people's journey toward more sustainable living habits. Rather than abstract environmental concepts, sustainable living focuses on tangible, everyday choices that collectively create significant positive impact. Reducing household waste through conscious consumption directly impacts environmental health. The average American generates about 4.5 pounds of trash daily. That's over 1,600 pounds annually per person. Much of this waste ends up in landfills, where it produces methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, or in oceans where it harms marine life. The good news is that relatively simple changes can dramatically reduce this waste stream. Conscious consumption begins before purchasing, with questions like, "Do I really need this item?" And "How long will this product last?" Choosing durable, repairable items over disposable alternatives creates immediate waste reduction. For example, a single high-quality stainless steel water bottle can replace hundreds of plastic bottles over its lifetime. Similarly, selecting products with minimal packaging or bringing your own containers for bulk purchases eliminates waste before it enters your home. Once items enter your household, extending their useful life further reduces waste. This might involve learning basic repair skills for clothing and electronics, repurposing items for new uses, or finding new owners for things you no longer need through donation, selling, or community sharing groups. When products truly reach the end of their useful life, proper recycling ensures materials return to productive use rather than becoming pollution. Food waste represents a particularly impactful area for improvement. Roughly 40% of food in the United States goes uneaten, a staggering statistic with serious environmental implications since food production requires significant resources and decomposing food generates methane in landfills. Practical strategies like meal planning, proper food storage, creative use of leftovers, and composting food scraps can dramatically reduce this waste while saving money and potentially improving nutrition. Energy conservation techniques can significantly lower both carbon footprints and utility expenses. Our homes use energy in various ways: heating and cooling, water heating, lighting, refrigeration, and electronic devices. Each area offers opportunities for substantial efficiency improvements through relatively simple changes. Temperature management typically represents the largest energy use in homes. Installing programmable thermostats allows automatic adjustment when you're sleeping or away. Adding insulation, sealing drafts around windows and doors, and using window coverings strategically to block summer heat or capture winter sunlight can dramatically reduce heating and cooling needs. Even simpler approaches like adjusting thermostats a few degrees, cooler in winter and warmer in summer, create substantial energy savings when maintained consistently. Water heating often ranks as the second largest energy use in households. Low-flow shower heads and faucet aerators reduce hot water consumption without sacrificing performance. Washing clothes in cold water works effectively with modern detergents while saving significant energy. Even small changes like fixing leaky faucets prevents wasting both water and the energy used to heat it. Lighting technology has transformed dramatically in recent years. LED bulbs use roughly 85% less energy than traditional incandescent bulbs, while lasting up to 25 times longer. Beyond bulb selection, behavioral changes like turning off lights when leaving rooms and maximizing natural daylight further reduce energy consumption. Electronics and appliances present less obvious but substantial opportunities for conservation. Many devices consume energy even when turned off, a phenomenon called phantom or vampire power. Using power strips to completely disconnect electronics when not in use eliminates this waste. When replacing appliances, looking for energy-efficient models with high efficiency ratings often pays back their potentially higher purchase price through years of lower operating costs. Plant-based dietary options offer environmental benefits while supporting personal health goals. Food choices represent some of our most significant environmental impacts, with animal agriculture generating approximately 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. Plant-based options typically require fewer resources to produce, less land, water, and energy, while generating fewer emissions. This doesn't necessarily mean adopting a completely vegetarian or vegan diet. Many people find that incremental changes, like participating in Meatless Monday or adopting a flexitarian approach that reduces but doesn't eliminate animal products, work better for sustained change. Even small shifts create meaningful impacts. Replacing beef with chicken occasionally reduces emissions significantly, while incorporating more legumes, whole grains, and seasonal vegetables generally improves both environmental footprint and nutritional intake. The environmental benefits extend beyond emissions. Plant-focused diets typically require less land, allowing for more natural habitat preservation or restoration. They generally consume less water. Producing 1 pound of beef requires approximately 1,800 gallons of water, compared to 216 gallons for soybeans. They also reduce pollution from concentrated animal feeding operations and minimize concerns about antibiotic resistance from livestock production. From a personal perspective, well-planned plant-rich diets align with recommendations from major health organizations, which associate them with lower risks of heart disease, certain cancers, and type 2 diabetes. They often cost less than meat-centered meals, especially when focusing on whole foods rather than processed meat alternatives. And they provide opportunities to explore diverse cuisines and ingredients that might otherwise be overlooked. Ethical purchasing decisions consider labor practices, material sourcing, and product life cycles. Every purchase represents a vote for certain production methods and business practices. Sustainable living involves becoming more conscious about these choices and gradually aligning purchasing with personal values. This might include researching companies' labor practices to avoid supporting exploitation or unsafe working conditions. It could mean choosing products made from responsibly sourced materials, like wood from sustainably managed forests certified by independent organizations, or textiles produced without harmful chemicals. It often involves considering a product's complete life cycle, including how it will eventually be disposed of or recycled. Practical approaches include looking for credible certifications that verify environmental or social claims, like fair trade for products including coffee and chocolate, or Energy Star for efficient appliances. Supporting local businesses often reduces transportation emissions while strengthening community economies. Choosing used or refurbished items extends product lifespans and typically saves money while reducing resource consumption for new manufacturing. The frequency of purchases matters as much as their content. The fast fashion approach of constantly buying trendy, low-quality clothing that quickly wears out creates enormous textile waste, while often involving problematic labor practices. Similarly, upgrading electronics annually, despite minimal functional improvements, generates substantial electronic waste containing hazardous materials. Developing a more thoughtful relationship with consumption, buying fewer, better things and keeping them longer, forms a cornerstone of sustainable living. Community-based sustainability initiatives often achieve greater impact than individual efforts alone. While personal choices matter significantly, many environmental challenges require collective action for meaningful solutions. Participating in or initiating community projects multiplies individual impact while creating social connections that sustain motivation. These initiatives take diverse forms depending on community needs and interests. Community gardens transform unused spaces into productive food sources while creating gathering places and educational opportunities. Tool libraries allow members to borrow infrequently used items rather than each household purchasing their own, reducing resource consumption while saving money. Repair cafes bring together people with repair skills and those with broken items, extending product lifespans while sharing valuable knowledge. Transportation represents another area where community approaches create substantial benefits. Carpooling reduces emissions while creating social connections. Advocating for improved public transportation, bike lanes, and walkable neighborhoods creates infrastructure that makes sustainable choices easier for everyone. Community solar projects allow residents to access renewable energy even if their own homes aren't suitable for solar installation. Beyond specific projects, community initiatives create cultural shifts that normalize sustainable behaviors. When composting, repairing, or biking becomes visible throughout a community, these practices spread more quickly than through individual adoption alone. Social connections formed through these activities provide support and accountability that help maintain new habits even when challenges arise. Zero-waste principles can be gradually implemented through systematic household changes. The term zero waste might sound intimidating or extreme, but it's best understood as a guiding philosophy rather than an absolute state. The approach focuses on progressively reducing waste through thoughtful systems and choices, rather than expecting immediate perfection. This systematic approach typically begins in the kitchen, where much household waste originates. Simple changes like using cloth napkins instead of paper, choosing reusable containers over plastic wrap or foil, and bringing reusable bags for grocery shopping eliminate regular sources of waste. The bathroom offers similar opportunities: bar soap instead of bottled, safety razors with replaceable blades rather than disposable plastic razors, and cloth towels instead of paper. As these initial changes become habitual, many people expand to more comprehensive approaches. This might include making household products like cleaning solutions from simple, non-toxic ingredients stored in reusable containers. It often involves creating systems that prevent waste, like keeping reusable bags, containers, and utensils easily accessible for spontaneous purchases or takeout food. And it typically includes communicating preferences to reduce unwanted items entering the home, such as opting out of junk mail or requesting no promotional items at events. The zero-waste movement emphasizes progress over perfection. Even people who have practiced these principles for years occasionally create trash. The goal isn't absolute elimination, but conscious reduction through systems that make sustainable choices the easiest default option. This gradual, practical approach makes significant waste reduction accessible to most households, regardless of location, income level, or family situation. Sustainable living ultimately represents a practical response to environmental challenges that offers numerous personal benefits, from cost savings to improved health to more meaningful connection with communities and resources. By focusing on tangible, everyday choices rather than abstract environmental concepts, these practices make ecological responsibility accessible and rewarding. Each small change creates ripple effects that extend far beyond individual households, collectively shifting toward more sustainable systems that benefit everyone. The sustainability practices that benefit our local communities take on new dimensions when we interact across cultural boundaries. As our world becomes increasingly interconnected, we regularly communicate with people whose cultural backgrounds differ significantly from our own, whether through international business, travel, online interactions, or diverse local communities. These cross-cultural exchanges offer tremendous opportunities for learning and collaboration, but they also present unique communication challenges that go far beyond simple language differences. Understanding how to navigate these cultural differences effectively has become an essential skill in our globalized society. Have you ever had a conversation with someone from another culture where something went unexpectedly wrong despite your best intentions? Perhaps they seemed uncomfortable with your questions, misinterpreted your tone, or reacted differently than you anticipated. These moments of cultural disconnect happen because communication is deeply rooted in cultural contexts that shape everything from how directly we express opinions to how we interpret silence. Cultural intelligence development requires both knowledge acquisition and practical experience. This capability goes beyond simple awareness of cultural differences to include the ability to adapt behavior appropriately in various cultural contexts. Unlike fixed factual knowledge, cultural intelligence is a dynamic skill that develops through a combination of learning and real-world practice. The knowledge component includes understanding basic cultural frameworks that help explain different communication patterns. For example, some cultures value direct, explicit communication, where messages are clearly stated and little is left to interpretation. Others practice high-context communication, where much of the message is implied rather than stated directly, with greater emphasis on contextual cues like body language, shared history, and situational factors. Neither approach is inherently better, but mismatches between these styles frequently cause misunderstandings. Another important knowledge dimension involves understanding specific cultural norms and expectations in regions or countries where you regularly interact. This includes basics like greeting customs, appropriate topics for conversation, gift-giving practices, and business etiquette. While memorizing these details for many cultures isn't practical, learning about specific cultures relevant to your life or work provides important foundation knowledge. However, knowledge alone isn't sufficient. Practical experience applying this understanding in real interactions is essential. This experiential learning helps develop the flexibility and observational skills necessary to navigate unfamiliar cultural contexts. People with well-developed cultural intelligence remain attentive to how their communication is being received and adjust accordingly, rather than rigidly applying memorized rules. Nonverbal communication varies significantly across cultures and requires conscious adaptation. While we often focus on words when thinking about communication, research suggests that a substantial portion of meaning comes through non-verbal channels, facial expressions, gestures, physical distance, touch, and vocal qualities like tone, pace, and volume. These non-verbal elements vary dramatically across cultures and often cause miscommunication when unrecognized. Personal space preferences illustrate these differences clearly. North Americans typically maintain approximately 1.5 to 4 feet of distance during conversations with acquaintances. Many Middle Eastern and Latin American cultures prefer closer conversational distances that might feel uncomfortably intimate to North Americans. Conversely, some Northern European cultures prefer greater personal space. When people from different space preference cultures interact without awareness of these differences, one person may perceive the other as either invasively close or coldly distant, neither impression being the intended message. Eye contact norms similarly vary across cultures. In many Western contexts, direct eye contact signals attention, honesty, and confidence. However, in numerous Asian, Middle Eastern, and indigenous cultures, direct eye contact with authority figures may be considered disrespectful or confrontational. Prolonged eye contact that communicates interest in North America might be interpreted as aggressive or inappropriately intimate in other contexts. Gestures that seem universal often carry different meanings or may be entirely absent in other cultures. The thumbs-up gesture, considered positive in North America, is offensive in parts of the Middle East and West Africa. Nodding the head, which indicates agreement in many Western cultures, signals disagreement in some parts of Bulgaria and Greece. Even smiling, which seems universally positive, serves different functions across cultures, in some contexts signaling happiness, while in others potentially indicating embarrassment, discomfort, or even insincerity. Successful cross-cultural communicators develop heightened awareness of their own non-verbal habits and remain attentive to how these might be interpreted differently across cultures. They also observe others' non-verbal communication patterns carefully, recognizing that their default interpretations might not apply in cross-cultural contexts. Language differences extend beyond vocabulary to include contextual and conceptual understanding. Even when communicating in a shared language, cultural backgrounds influence how words and phrases are interpreted. These differences include communication styles, contextual assumptions, and concepts that don't translate directly between languages. Communication directness varies significantly across cultures. North American and Northern European communication often values clarity and directness, explicitly stating opinions, requests, and refusals. Many Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin American cultures favor more indirect communication that preserves harmony and saves face. In these contexts, a direct no might be considered rude, with refusals instead communicated through expressions like, "that might be difficult," or "I'll see what I can do." Without understanding these differences, direct communicators may perceive indirect styles as dishonest or confusing, while indirect communicators might view directness as blunt or insensitive. Neither assessment accurately reflects the communicator's intent, but rather the cultural lens through which the message is interpreted. Humor presents particular challenges across cultures, as it often relies on shared references and linguistic subtleties. What's funny in one culture might be confusing, offensive, or simply not humorous in another. Sarcasm and irony, which depend on understanding that the speaker means the opposite of what they're literally saying, vary greatly in acceptability and recognition across cultures. Effective cross-cultural communicators typically use humor cautiously in unfamiliar cultural contexts, especially when building new relationships. Some concepts simply don't translate directly between languages because they reflect cultural values or experiences without exact equivalents. The Danish concept of hygge, a quality of coziness and comfortable conviviality, the Japanese wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection, or the Portuguese saudade, a deep longing or melancholic nostalgia, lack precise English translations because they represent culturally specific experiences. Understanding these unique concepts provides insights into cultural values that influence communication patterns. Value systems influence communication priorities and expectations in cross-cultural exchanges. Beyond specific communication practices, deeper cultural values shape what topics are discussed, how disagreements are handled, and what communication goals are prioritized. These fundamental differences often operate below conscious awareness, but significantly impact interactions. Some cultures prioritize individual expression and personal achievement, while others emphasize group harmony and collective well-being. These orientations influence communication in countless ways, from how credit is assigned for successful projects to whether personal opinions are freely expressed when they differ from the group consensus. Attitudes toward hierarchy and authority similarly vary across cultures. Some societies maintain relatively small power distances, with fairly egalitarian interactions between people of different status levels. Others observe more formal status distinctions with specific language, behaviors, and protocols based on relative positions. These differences affect who speaks when, how disagreement is expressed, and even seating arrangements in meetings. Time orientation represents another significant value difference. Some cultures operate with precise scheduling and strict punctuality, while others take more flexible approaches to time. These differences influence everything from meeting start times to deadlines to how long relationships should develop before conducting business. Understanding these value differences helps explain why certain approaches that work effectively in one cultural context may fail in another. It also provides insight into the why behind communication differences, making adaptation feel more meaningful than simply following arbitrary rules. Stereotyping awareness helps prevent unconscious bias from affecting intercultural interactions. While understanding cultural patterns is useful, applying this knowledge requires careful balance. Cultural frameworks provide helpful general guidelines, but must be applied with recognition of individual differences and changing cultural practices. Effective cross-cultural communicators distinguish between stereotypes, oversimplified fixed ideas about all members of a group, and cultural patterns, general tendencies that vary between individuals and contexts. They use cultural knowledge as a starting point for understanding rather than as rigid expectations for how individuals will behave. This balanced approach recognizes that cultures aren't monolithic. Significant regional, generational, and individual variations exist within any cultural group. It acknowledges that cultures constantly evolve, particularly in our interconnected world where practices and values blend and transform through global interaction. And it remembers that multiple cultural influences shape each person's communication style, including professional, generational, and regional cultures beyond national identity. Conflict resolution approaches must be adapted to cultural expectations regarding harmony and directness. Conflicts inevitably arise in cross-cultural interactions, often stemming from the very differences in communication and values previously discussed. Resolving these conflicts successfully requires understanding how conflict management itself varies across cultures. Some cultures address conflict directly and explicitly, focusing on the specific issue at hand while separating the problem from the people involved. Other cultures approach conflict more indirectly, prioritizing relationship preservation over problem resolution, and sometimes addressing issues through third-party intermediaries rather than direct confrontation. Timing of conflict resolution also varies culturally. Some approaches emphasize immediate addressing of problems to prevent escalation, while others prefer allowing cooling-off periods before discussion. Face-saving mechanisms, ways to resolve issues without causing public embarrassment, hold different importance across cultures, with some considering them essential and others viewing them as less critical than finding direct solutions. These differences mean that conflict resolution strategies, effective in one cultural context, may worsen situations in another. Awareness of these variations allows adaptation of approach based on the cultural backgrounds involved, often finding middle ground solutions that address the substantive issues while respecting cultural preferences regarding process. Building cross-cultural communication skills requires ongoing commitment and practice. Unlike learning specific facts, developing these capabilities is a continuous process that evolves through experience, reflection, and adaptation. Approaching cross-cultural interactions with curiosity rather than judgment, seeking to understand before being understood, and maintaining flexibility all contribute to more effective communication across cultural boundaries. This cultural adaptability doesn't mean abandoning personal values or cultural identity. Rather, it represents expanding communication repertoires to connect effectively across differences while maintaining authenticity. The goal isn't becoming someone else, but rather developing the flexibility to build bridges across cultural differences when the situation calls for it. As our world continues becoming more interconnected, these cross-cultural communication skills become increasingly valuable, not just for international business or diplomacy, but for everyday interactions in diverse communities. The ability to navigate cultural differences effectively creates opportunities for richer relationships, more innovative collaborations, and deeper understanding across boundaries that might otherwise divide us. The adaptability required for effective cross-cultural communication reflects a broader capacity that serves us well beyond cultural interactions. This flexibility and openness to learning from challenges represents core elements of personal resilience, perhaps one of the most valuable capabilities we can develop in today's rapidly changing world. While cross-cultural skills help us navigate external differences, resilience helps us navigate life's inevitable difficulties with our psychological well-being intact. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to bounce back quickly from setbacks, while others struggle for much longer with similar challenges? The difference often comes down to resilience, the ability to adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. Contrary to popular belief, resilience isn't an innate trait that some people have and others don't. Rather, it's a set of skills and approaches that can be deliberately developed through specific practices and mindset shifts. Stress management techniques provide practical tools for navigating challenging circumstances. Stress itself isn't inherently negative. It's a natural response that can motivate action and focus attention. However, chronic or overwhelming stress can impair both physical health and decision-making abilities. Resilient individuals aren't stress-free. They simply have effective methods for managing stress responses. Physical stress management approaches work by activating the body's relaxation response to counteract stress hormones. Deep breathing techniques, like breathing in for a count of 4, holding for 7, and exhaling for 8, can rapidly reduce physiological stress responses. Regular physical activity releases tension while producing endorphins that improve mood. Adequate sleep allows the brain to process emotional experiences and restore cognitive function, with most adults needing between 7 and 9 hours nightly. Cognitive stress management involves identifying and modifying thought patterns that amplify stress. This might include recognizing catastrophic thinking, everything is falling apart, and replacing it with more balanced assessments. This specific situation is difficult, but other areas of my life are stable. It often involves distinguishing between problems within our control, which benefit from solution-focused thinking, and circumstances beyond our control, which require acceptance strategies. Time management represents another crucial stress reduction approach. This includes setting realistic goals, breaking large tasks into manageable steps and establishing boundaries around time and availability. Many resilient people practice strategic incompleteness, deliberately leaving certain tasks undone or done imperfectly to preserve energy for higher priorities. They recognize that saying yes to everything means saying no to their well-being. Growth mindset cultivation enables individuals to view setbacks as learning opportunities. Our interpretations of challenges significantly influence how they affect us. Those with fixed mindsets tend to view difficulties as confirmations of personal inadequacy. I failed because I'm not smart enough. While those with growth mindsets see the same situations as chances to develop. I failed because I need to try a different approach. This perspective shift transforms how we experience setbacks. Rather than threats to identity or confirmation of limitations, challenges become valuable information about what works and what doesn't. This doesn't mean pretending failure feels good. Disappointment remains real, but it changes the narrative from permanent defeat to temporary setback within a larger learning journey. Practical growth mindset development includes noticing fixed mindset language in our internal dialogue and deliberately reframing it. When thinking, "I'm terrible at this," we might substitute, "I'm still learning this skill." When faced with criticism, rather than becoming defensive, we can ask, "What can I learn from this feedback?" These small linguistic shifts gradually reshape our relationship with challenges. The growth mindset extends beyond individual capabilities to our view of personality and relationships. Seeing our own traits and others' behaviors as adaptable rather than fixed creates space for development and reconciliation. This perspective fosters persistence when relationships encounter difficulties and encourages giving ourselves and others grace during learning processes. Support network development creates crucial social resources during difficult times. Resilience isn't a solo achievement, but rather develops within supportive social contexts. Research consistently shows that strong social connections serve as buffers against stress and accelerate recovery from setbacks. Building and maintaining these connections represents a fundamental resilience practice. This begins with nurturing existing relationships through regular contact, meaningful conversations, and reciprocal support. It involves being willing to ask for help when needed, something many people find challenging despite its importance. And it often requires diversifying support sources rather than relying exclusively on one or two people, which creates vulnerability if those key supporters become unavailable. Different relationships provide different types of support. Some offer emotional comfort during difficult times, others provide practical assistance with tangible problems, while still others bring perspective or specific expertise. Recognizing these various support functions helps us intentionally develop well-rounded networks, rather than expecting any single relationship to meet all needs. Support networks extend beyond close personal relationships to include community connections. Involvement with groups sharing common interests or values, whether religious communities, volunteer organizations, hobby groups, or professional associations, creates a sense of belonging that contributes significantly to resilience. These broader connections often provide stability during periods when closer relationships may be strained by the very challenges requiring resilience. Self-compassion practices counteract negative self-talk that undermines resilience. How we speak to ourselves during difficult times dramatically affects our ability to recover and learn from challenges. Many people habitually respond to setbacks with harsh self-criticism, believing this toughness will motivate improvement. Research suggests the opposite. Self-criticism typically increases stress while reducing motivation and problem-solving capacity. Self-compassion offers an alternative approach with three key components. First, treating ourselves with kindness rather than judgment when facing difficulties. Second, recognizing our struggles as part of common human experience rather than signs of personal inadequacy. Third, maintaining balanced awareness of painful thoughts and feelings without suppressing or exaggerating them. Practical self-compassion techniques include speaking to ourselves as we would to a good friend facing similar challenges. This doesn't mean making excuses or avoiding responsibility, but rather addressing difficulties with supportive understanding rather than harsh criticism. It often involves physical self-soothing gestures like placing a hand over the heart while acknowledging difficult emotions, and it typically includes recognizing that imperfection and occasional failure are universal human experiences rather than personal shortcomings. Meaning-making helps individuals integrate difficult experiences into coherent personal narratives. While some challenges resolve quickly, others, like significant losses, health diagnoses, or major life transitions, require deeper integration. The ability to construct meaningful narratives about these experiences significantly influences long-term resilience. This doesn't mean finding something positive in every difficult situation or forcing artificial silver linings onto genuine tragedies. Rather, it involves making sense of experiences in ways that preserve a sense of coherence and purpose. For some, this process occurs through conversations with trusted others. For others, writing about experiences helps organize thoughts and find patterns. Many find that creative expression through art, music, or other forms provides pathways to meaning not accessible through logical analysis alone. Meaning-making often connects personal experiences to values and broader life purpose. When challenges align with what matters most to us, perhaps testing our commitment to certain principles or revealing previously unrecognized priorities, they become meaningful parts of our larger life story rather than random misfortunes. This connection to purpose doesn't eliminate suffering, but provides context that makes it more bearable. Adaptability skills allow for flexible responses to changing circumstances and unexpected challenges. The modern world changes rapidly, with technological developments, economic shifts, and social transformations creating continuous evolution. Resilient individuals develop comfort with uncertainty and capacity for flexible adjustment rather than rigid resistance to change. Practical adaptability begins with information gathering rather than immediate reaction when facing unexpected situations. This includes seeking to understand what's actually happening before determining response, consulting diverse perspectives to avoid tunnel vision, and remaining open to revising assessments as new information emerges. It involves distinguishing between unchangeable circumstances that require acceptance and aspects of situations that remain amenable to influence. Psychological flexibility, the ability to stay present with difficult thoughts and feelings while continuing to act according to values, supports adaptability in challenging situations. This skill allows maintaining effectiveness even when experiencing discomfort, rather than becoming paralyzed by negative emotions or expending energy trying to eliminate them. Techniques like mindful awareness of thoughts, without automatically believing or acting on them, help develop this capacity. Adaptable individuals typically maintain what psychologists call loose construing, holding beliefs and expectations flexibly rather than rigidly. This approach recognizes that initial interpretations of situations may be incomplete or incorrect, and remains open to revising understanding as circumstances evolve. It allows for adjusting goals and methods while maintaining core values and direction. Deliberate discomfort practices help build confidence in adaptability. This might involve occasionally changing routines, trying activities outside comfort zones, or practicing tolerance for minor inconveniences without immediate resolution. These experiences build evidence that we can handle discomfort successfully, reducing fear of future changes or challenges. Resilience development works best as an ongoing practice rather than a crisis response. While these approaches certainly help during active difficulties, they're most effective when developed during relatively stable periods. Just as physical fitness develops through regular exercise rather than occasional intense efforts, psychological resilience strengthens through consistent practices integrated into daily life. This proactive approach means deliberately engaging with smaller challenges rather than avoiding all discomfort. It involves reflecting on past difficulties to extract lessons about personal strengths and effective coping strategies. And it requires regular maintenance of supportive relationships, stress management practices, and meaning connections rather than attempting to establish these resources during crises. Rather than portraying an unrealistic vision of perpetual happiness, resilience represents the capacity to experience the full range of human emotions, including pain, grief, and fear, while maintaining psychological functioning and eventually returning to well-being. It acknowledges that difficult experiences are inevitable parts of any meaningful life, while providing practical approaches to navigate these challenges without becoming defined or diminished by them. By developing specific resilience skills and mindsets, we build internal resources that serve us through life's inevitable difficulties. These capabilities don't eliminate pain or prevent challenges, but they transform our relationship with adversity, allowing us to learn, grow, and ultimately thrive even through life's most demanding chapters. The resilience skills that help us navigate life's challenges also serve as essential foundations for another crucial area of personal development: learning effectively. After all, learning itself often involves embracing difficulties, maintaining persistence through confusion, and bouncing back from mistakes. The capacity to learn continuously throughout life represents one of our most valuable assets in a rapidly changing world. Yet surprisingly, most educational systems teach subject content without explicitly addressing how to learn efficiently. Understanding evidence-based learning strategies can dramatically improve our ability to acquire new knowledge and skills regardless of the specific subject matter. Have you ever spent hours rereading textbooks or highlighting notes only to find yourself struggling to recall the information during an exam or when you actually needed to apply it? You're not alone. Many commonly used study methods feel productive, but research shows they're remarkably inefficient. The good news is that cognitive science has identified specific learning techniques that work significantly better, approaches that align with how our brains actually store and retrieve information. Spaced repetition techniques optimize memory retention through strategic review scheduling. Our brains don't store information through simple exposure. They strengthen memories through repeated retrieval attempts over time. When we encounter information just once, even if we understand it perfectly in that moment, our brains often fail to encode it for long-term storage. Reviewing material multiple times dramatically improves retention, but the timing of these reviews matters enormously. The spacing effect refers to the finding that spreading study sessions over time produces much better long-term retention than cramming the same total study time into a single session. This happens because each time we retrieve information after partially forgetting it, we strengthen the neural pathways associated with that memory. The ideal spacing interval gradually increases as our memory strengthens, perhaps reviewing new information within a day, then after 3 days, then after a week, and so on. Digital tools have made implementing spaced repetition particularly accessible. Apps like Anki, Quizlet, and Memrise use algorithms that track which information you find difficult and automatically schedule review sessions at optimal intervals. However, even simple approaches like creating flashcards and reviewing them on a planned schedule capture the core benefits of spaced repetition. Active recall practices strengthen neural pathways more effectively than passive review methods. Simply reading or highlighting information represents a relatively passive approach to learning. By contrast, actively forcing yourself to retrieve information from memory creates stronger and more accessible neural connections. This retrieval practice more closely mimics the actual situations where you'll need the information later, whether during exams, conversations, or practical applications. Practical implementations of active recall include closing your book or notes and writing down everything you remember about a topic, creating flashcards with questions on one side and answers on the other, or explaining concepts aloud without reference materials. Even better, try applying information to new situations or practice questions that require using the knowledge in different contexts than it was initially presented. The testing effect, closely related to active recall, shows that attempting to retrieve information improves learning more than additional study time. This means that frequent self-quizzing, even when you make mistakes, leads to better long-term retention than simply reviewing material repeatedly. The struggle to recall information, even when unsuccessful, primes the brain for better encoding when you subsequently review the correct information. Concept mapping helps learners visualize relationships between ideas and integrate new knowledge. Our brains don't store information as isolated facts, but rather as interconnected networks of concepts. Learning becomes more effective when we deliberately establish connections between new information and existing knowledge, creating organized mental frameworks rather than disconnected pieces of information. Creating visual representations of these connections through concept maps, mind maps, or other diagrams forces us to think about how information relates rather than just memorizing isolated facts. Start with a central concept and branch outward, drawing lines between related ideas and labeling the nature of these relationships. This approach works particularly well for subjects with complex interconnections like biology, history, or systems-based fields. Elaboration, the process of explaining concepts in your own words and connecting them to what you already know, similarly enhances learning by creating multiple pathways to retrieve information. When studying, regularly ask yourself questions like, how does this relate to what I already know? Or, how would I explain this to someone else? These questions prompt deeper processing than simply rereading material. Deliberate practice focuses on targeted improvement rather than comfortable repetition of mastered skills. When developing practical abilities rather than factual knowledge, how we practice matters tremendously. Many people practice by repeatedly doing what they already can do well, which feels satisfying but produces limited improvement. Deliberate practice instead targets specific weaknesses through structured, often uncomfortable exercises designed to develop particular aspects of performance. This approach begins with breaking complex skills into component parts that can be practiced individually. For a musician, this might mean isolating difficult passages rather than playing entire pieces repeatedly. For a language learner, it could involve focused practice on specific grammatical structures or pronunciation challenges rather than general conversation. For physical skills, it typically includes slowing movements down to establish proper technique before building speed. Feedback represents another crucial element of deliberate practice. This might come from teachers, coaches, recordings of your own performance, or careful self-assessment against clear criteria. The key is receiving specific information about what aspects need improvement, rather than general evaluations like good or needs work. This targeted feedback guides subsequent practice sessions toward the areas that will produce the greatest improvement. Metacognitive awareness allows learners to monitor and adjust their learning approaches as needed. Metacognition, thinking about our own thinking, helps us recognize when we truly understand something versus when we merely feel familiar with it. This awareness prevents the common situation where students feel confident after reviewing material, but then struggle when actually tested on it. Practical metacognitive strategies include regular self-testing to assess actual knowledge rather than relying on feelings of familiarity. After studying a topic, Try explaining it without reference materials or solving practice problems, then honestly assess where you struggled. This reveals gaps in understanding that might not be apparent during passive review. Another valuable metacognitive approach involves predicting test questions or applications of material. Asking, what questions might appear on an exam about this topic? Or, how might I need to use this information in a real situation? Focuses attention on the most important aspects of the material and highlights areas requiring further study. Learning journals provide another metacognitive tool, especially for extended learning projects. Briefly recording what you studied, what questions arose, what connections you noticed, and what remains unclear helps track progress while identifying patterns in your learning challenges. Reviewing these notes periodically reveals which approaches work best for different types of material. Environmental optimization removes distractions and leverages contextual cues to enhance focus. Our physical environment significantly impacts learning effectiveness. Simple adjustments like silencing notifications, establishing dedicated study spaces, and using website blockers during focused work sessions prevent the concentration fractures that severely impair learning efficiency. The state-dependent learning effect suggests that we retrieve information best in similar contexts to where we learned it. This means studying in environments resembling where you'll need to use the information, perhaps practicing presentations standing up rather than sitting, or reviewing material in similar noise conditions to where you'll be tested. For students, this might mean occasionally studying in the actual classroom where exams will occur. Time management specifically tailored to learning represents another environmental factor. Research on attention spans suggests that focused learning sessions of 25 to 45 minutes, followed by short breaks, optimize concentration for most people. The Pomodoro technique formalizes this approach with 25-minute work intervals separated by 5-minute breaks, with longer breaks after 4 work sessions. Interleaving, mixing different topics or types of problems within a single study session, produces better long-term learning than studying one subject exclusively before moving to another. While this approach initially feels more difficult and may slow immediate progress, it forces the brain to continuously retrieve different learning contexts, strengthening overall retention and transferability. Explanatory learning enhances retention through teaching others. One of the most effective ways to solidify understanding involves explaining concepts to someone else, whether actually teaching another person or simply pretending to teach while speaking aloud. This approach forces clarification of thinking, reveals gaps in understanding, and creates multiple retrieval pathways for the information. This technique works even without an actual audience. Simply explaining concepts aloud as if teaching someone else provides much of the benefit. Study groups can leverage this effect by having members take turns teaching different concepts to the group, with others asking questions that require deeper explanation. Sleep plays a surprisingly important role in learning effectiveness. During sleep, especially deep sleep, our brains consolidate memories, transferring information from short-term to long-term storage and integrating new learning with existing knowledge. Studies consistently show that sleep between learning and testing improves performance compared to equivalent waking time. Practical applications include reviewing important information shortly before sleep to enhance consolidation, prioritizing consistent sleep schedules during intensive learning periods, and considering short naps after significant learning sessions. For students, this research strongly suggests that all-night study sessions before exams typically hurt rather than help performance. By implementing these evidence-based learning strategies, we can dramatically improve our ability to acquire and retain knowledge across any domain. Rather than relying on intuition about what feels effective, Aligning our learning approaches with how our brains actually process information allows us to learn more thoroughly with less total time invested. These techniques apply whether you're a formal student, a professional developing career skills, or simply someone pursuing personal interests. Effective learning represents a meta skill that enhances virtually every other capability we might want to develop throughout our lives. The learning strategies we've explored aren't just useful for acquiring existing knowledge, they also enhance our ability to create new solutions and ideas. This brings us to a related but distinct skill set: creative problem solving. While learning focuses on understanding what's already known, problem solving involves navigating uncertainty to address challenges that don't have established answers. The most innovative solutions often emerge not from applying standard procedures, but from approaching problems with specific methodologies designed to expand possibilities and overcome common thinking limitations. Have you ever noticed how some people consistently generate fresh approaches to challenges, while others tend to propose the same solutions repeatedly? Creative problem solving isn't simply a matter of innate talent or spontaneous inspiration. Instead, it involves deliberate processes that can be learned and applied systematically. These approaches help circumvent the mental ruts and assumptions that typically constrain our thinking when facing complex problems. Divergent thinking techniques generate multiple possibilities before evaluating specific solutions. Our brains naturally gravitate toward the first workable solution we identify, a tendency that served our ancestors well when quick responses were needed for survival. However, this cognitive shortcut often prevents us from discovering superior alternatives that might require more exploration. Divergent thinking deliberately suspends evaluation to expand the solution space before narrowing down to specific approaches. Brainstorming represents perhaps the most familiar divergent thinking technique, though it's often implemented ineffectively. Productive brainstorming separates idea generation from idea evaluation, establishing ground rules that prohibit criticism during the generation phase. This separation prevents premature rejection of unconventional ideas that might initially seem impractical but could contain valuable elements. Quantity matters during this phase. Aiming for dozens or even hundreds of ideas increases the likelihood of discovering truly innovative approaches. Structured questioning techniques enhance divergent thinking by challenging assumptions and exploring alternative perspectives. Questions like, "What if we reversed the problem?" Or, "How would different people approach this situation?" prompt consideration of angles that might otherwise remain unexplored. The scamper technique, substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to other uses, eliminate, reverse, provides specific prompts that systematically push thinking in different directions. Random stimulation techniques deliberately introduce unrelated elements to spark unexpected connections. This might involve selecting random words, images, or objects, and forcing connections to the problem at hand. While initially these connections may seem absurd, they often trigger associations that break established thinking patterns. This approach works because innovation frequently emerges from connecting previously unrelated concepts in novel ways. Constraint identification often reveals hidden opportunities within seemingly limiting parameters. Counterintuitively, constraints can actually enhance creativity rather than restricting it. Without boundaries, the infinite possibilities can paralyze thinking or lead to scattered exploration. Well-defined constraints focus creative energy within productive channels, much like riverbanks direct water flow rather than impeding it. Effective problem solvers deliberately identify both explicit constraints, budget limitations, technical requirements, deadlines, and implicit assumptions that may unnecessarily restrict thinking. They distinguish between genuine constraints that must be respected and perceived limitations that could potentially be challenged. Questions like, what are we assuming must be true? Or which requirements are actually flexible? Help uncover these hidden assumptions. Some problem-solving approaches deliberately introduce artificial constraints to stimulate creativity. For example, asking, how would we solve this with half the budget? Or, what if we had to implement this in half the time? Forces consideration of radically different approaches. Even if these extreme constraints don't apply to the actual situation, the exercise often generates insights applicable to the original problem. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi embraces imperfection and limitation as sources of beauty and innovation. This perspective transforms constraints from obstacles into creative catalysts. Rather than fighting against limitations, this approach asks how the constraints themselves might suggest unique solutions or even become advantageous elements of the final result. Cross-disciplinary approaches apply principles from unrelated fields to generate novel insights. Some of history's most significant innovations emerged from transferring ideas between seemingly unconnected domains. Velcro was inspired by plant burrs sticking to a dog's fur. Medical advances have come from surgeons studying Formula One pit crews' coordination. Architectural solutions have emerged from examining natural structures like beehives or seashells. Deliberately exploring how different fields address similar challenges can reveal transferable principles. How do biologists approach adaptation? How do economists think about resource allocation? How do designers create intuitive user experiences? These diverse perspectives often suggest approaches that wouldn't emerge within the conventional thinking of a single discipline. Metaphorical thinking represents a specific cross-disciplinary technique. By framing a problem in terms of a completely different domain, this customer service challenge is like an immune system responding to threats, or our communication process resembles a transportation network. New features and potential solutions become visible. The metaphor highlights certain aspects of the situation while temporarily setting others aside, allowing fresh perspectives to emerge. Prototyping allows for low-risk testing of potential solutions before full implementation. Rather than debating hypothetical outcomes or committing fully to unproven approaches, prototyping creates tangible representations that can be tested, refined, and improved through multiple iterations. This approach reduces both risk and emotional attachment to specific solutions by making improvement an expected part of the process rather than an admission of failure. Effective prototypes share key characteristics. They're created quickly and inexpensively, focus on testing critical assumptions rather than perfecting details, and generate specific feedback to guide improvements. Early prototypes often appear rough or incomplete by design. Their purpose is learning rather than implementation or presentation. Each iteration addresses questions raised by previous versions, gradually refining the solution through empirical testing rather than abstract discussion. The form of prototypes varies widely depending on what's being created. Physical products might begin as simple cardboard mock-ups before progressing to functional models. Services might be prototyped through role-playing exercises or limited trials with small customer groups. Software interfaces might start as paper sketches before becoming interactive wireframes. Even organizational processes can be prototyped through small-scale pilots before wider implementation. Collaborative ideation leverages diverse perspectives to identify blind spots and enrich solutions. While individual thinking certainly produces valuable insights, groups with diverse knowledge, experiences, and thinking styles typically generate more comprehensive solutions, provided the collaboration is structured effectively. Productive collaboration doesn't mean simply gathering people in a room for unstructured discussion, but rather implementing specific processes that maximize collective intelligence. Effective collaborative problem-solving begins with team composition. Including people with different disciplinary backgrounds, cognitive styles, experience levels, and demographic characteristics creates cognitive diversity that enhances solution quality. Research consistently shows that diverse teams outperform homogeneous groups in complex problem solving, even when individual members have higher expertise in homogeneous groups. Structured facilitation prevents common collaboration pitfalls like groupthink, excessive agreement that suppresses dissenting views, production blocking, inability for multiple people to express ideas simultaneously, and dominance by high-status or extroverted team members. Techniques like brainwriting, where ideas are initially written rather than verbalized, round-robin participation, where each person contributes in turn, and anonymous idea submission help ensure all perspectives receive consideration. Psychological safety, the shared belief that team members won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, or concerns, forms the foundation for effective collaboration. Without this safety, team members withhold potentially valuable contributions, particularly those that challenge established thinking or powerful individuals. Leaders create psychological safety by modeling vulnerability, acknowledging their own uncertainty, explicitly valuing diverse viewpoints, and responding constructively to all contributions. Implementation planning transforms theoretical solutions into actionable steps with accountability measures. Many potentially valuable solutions fail not because of flawed concepts, but because of inadequate implementation planning. Bridging the gap between creative ideas and practical execution requires systematic approaches that anticipate obstacles, establish clear responsibilities, and create feedback mechanisms to monitor progress. Backward planning offers one effective implementation approach. Rather than starting with immediate next steps, this process begins by clearly defining success criteria and working backward to identify necessary preceding actions. This approach helps ensure all required elements receive consideration and reveals dependencies between different components of the implementation. Pre-mortem exercises strengthen implementation plans by anticipating potential failure points before they occur. Unlike post-mortems that analyze failures after they happen, pre-mortems ask team members to imagine that the implementation has failed and then work backward to identify what might have caused this hypothetical failure. This perspective shift often reveals risks and assumptions that might otherwise remain unexamined until problems actually emerge. Clear accountability structures determine who is responsible for specific actions, what authority they have to make decisions, what resources they can access, and how progress will be measured and reported. Without these elements, even well-conceived plans often stall as responsibilities remain ambiguous and follow-through becomes inconsistent. Feedback loops provide crucial information during implementation, allowing course correction rather than discovering problems only after completion. Establishing specific checkpoints for reviewing progress, gathering data on early outcomes, and reassessing assumptions helps ensure the implementation remains on track while accommodating new information or changing circumstances. The most effective problem solvers integrate these methodologies flexibly rather than applying them as rigid formulas. They select and combine approaches based on the specific nature of each problem, sometimes emphasizing divergent thinking for highly ambiguous challenges, focusing on prototyping when testing is straightforward, or prioritizing implementation planning when execution complexity presents the greatest risk. What unites these diverse approaches is their systematic nature, replacing vague hopes for inspiration with deliberate processes that consistently produce innovative solutions. By applying these methodologies, we can enhance our natural problem-solving abilities and develop more creative, practical, and effective responses to the complex challenges we face in personal, professional, and community contexts. These systematic problem-solving approaches gain even greater power when applied at the community level. While individual and organizational problem-solving create valuable solutions, Some of our most pressing challenges require broader collective action. Communities represent unique problem-solving environments where diverse stakeholders with varying interests, perspectives, and resources must work together effectively. Building healthy community engagement creates the foundation for addressing complex shared challenges while strengthening the social fabric that supports individual well-being. Have you ever noticed how some communities seem to thrive despite facing significant challenges, while others with similar resources struggle to make progress on even simple projects? The difference often comes down to how effectively they engage community members and build collaborative capacity. Healthy community engagement isn't simply about having more people attend meetings. It involves specific approaches that foster meaningful participation, harness collective wisdom, and distribute both benefits and responsibilities equitably. Inclusive participation strategies ensure diverse voices contribute to community initiatives. Many traditional community engagement approaches inadvertently exclude significant portions of the population. Meeting times may conflict with work schedules for hourly employees. Venues might be inaccessible to people with disabilities. Discussion formats often favor those comfortable with public speaking or familiar with formal procedures. These barriers create engagement patterns where the same small group of residents makes decisions affecting the entire community. Effective inclusive participation begins with recognizing who isn't in the room and proactively addressing barriers to their involvement. This might include offering multiple participation options, perhaps combining in-person gatherings with online input opportunities, or supplementing large community meetings with smaller conversations in neighborhood settings. It often involves providing support services like childcare, transportation assistance, or language interpretation that enable participation from frequently excluded groups. Beyond logistics, inclusive participation requires creating environments where all contributions are genuinely valued. This means using facilitation approaches that prevent domination by the most vocal or privileged voices, ensuring information is presented in accessible language without unnecessary jargon, and demonstrating that diverse input actually influences decisions rather than serving as tokenistic consultation after choices have already been made. Digital tools have expanded participation possibilities, particularly for residents unable to attend traditional meetings due to work schedules, caregiving responsibilities, or mobility limitations. However, technology alone doesn't ensure inclusion. Communities must consider digital literacy levels and internet access disparities while maintaining multiple participation pathways rather than moving exclusively online. Conflict transformation approaches address underlying needs rather than superficial positions. Conflict inevitably emerges in community settings where diverse stakeholders bring different priorities, values, and interests. How this conflict is handled dramatically influences whether community initiatives succeed or stall. Traditional conflict resolution often focuses on compromise between opposing positions, but community conflict transformation goes deeper to address fundamental needs and relationships. This approach begins with creating safe spaces for stakeholders to express underlying concerns rather than just stating demands. Facilitated dialogue processes help participants move beyond positional statements like, "We need speed bumps on this street," versus "Speed bumps will delay emergency vehicles," to explore deeper shared interests in both safety and accessibility. This exploration often reveals creative solutions that address multiple needs simultaneously, rather than forcing win-lose choices. Conflict transformation recognizes that community disagreements frequently stem from historical patterns of exclusion, unacknowledged power imbalances, or past harms that haven't been addressed. Taking time to acknowledge these deeper dimensions, rather than treating each conflict as an isolated issue, creates more sustainable resolutions and strengthens community relationships rather than merely settling immediate disputes. Practical conflict transformation tools include circle processes where each person speaks without interruption, facilitated dialogue that separates understanding from agreement, and approaches that distinguish between individuals and the problems being discussed. These methods help transform potentially divisive conflicts into opportunities for deeper understanding and more nuanced solutions. Asset-based community development identifies and leverages existing strengths within communities. Traditional community improvement approaches often begin by conducting needs assessments that catalog problems and deficiencies. While understanding challenges is important, exclusively focusing on what's wrong can inadvertently reinforce narratives of community helplessness and dependency on external resources. Asset-based approaches begin instead by systematically identifying community strengths, the skills and knowledge of residents, existing formal and informal organizations, physical spaces and facilities, economic resources, and cultural assets. This inventory creates a foundation for development strategies that build on what's already working, rather than importing solutions that may not fit local contexts. This approach recognizes that every community, regardless of economic status, contains significant assets often overlooked by conventional assessment methods. These might include residents with specialized skills, from mechanical abilities to artistic talents, informal networks that already distribute resources and information, underutilized physical spaces like school buildings after hours, or cultural traditions that bring people together regularly. Mapping these assets involves both formal methods like surveys and community mapping exercises, and informal approaches like storytelling sessions, where residents share knowledge about neighborhood resources. This process itself builds community connections as people discover capabilities in their neighbors they hadn't previously recognized. Effective community development connects these identified assets to address challenges, creating solutions rooted in local resources, supplemented by external support where necessary. This approach builds sustainability by ensuring initiatives don't depend entirely on outside funding or expertise, while fostering community ownership and pride. Sustainable volunteer engagement requires alignment between individual motivations and organizational needs. Many community initiatives depend heavily on volunteer involvement, yet struggle with recruitment difficulties or high turnover. Sustainable engagement strategies recognize that volunteers participate for diverse reasons, some seeking social connection, others wanting to develop skills, many hoping to make meaningful contributions to causes they value. Effective volunteer programs begin by understanding these varied motivations, rather than assuming everyone volunteers for the same reasons. They create diverse engagement opportunities, matching different interests, skills, and availability, from one-time project support to ongoing leadership roles. They establish clear expectations about time commitments and responsibilities, while remaining flexible enough to accommodate volunteers' changing life circumstances. Recognition systems acknowledge contributions in ways meaningful to volunteers, rather than using one-size-fits-all approaches. Some volunteers appreciate public recognition, while others prefer seeing tangible impact from their efforts. Understanding these preferences allows organizations to show appreciation effectively without wasting resources on unwanted recognition methods. Perhaps most importantly, sustainable volunteer programs create genuine voice and agency for volunteers, rather than treating them merely as free labor. This means involving volunteers in planning processes, soliciting their input on program improvements, and creating pathways for increased responsibility for those seeking greater involvement. When volunteers see their ideas implemented and their expertise valued, their commitment to the organization typically strengthens significantly. Decision-making processes influence both the quality of outcomes and community buy-in. How decisions get made in community settings often matters as much as what decisions are ultimately reached. Clear, transparent processes build trust and legitimacy, even among those who might disagree with specific outcomes, while opaque or inconsistent methods generate suspicion regardless of the decisions themselves. Effective community decision-making begins with clarity about which decisions require broad input versus those appropriately delegated to individuals or smaller groups. Not every decision requires full community consultation. Attempting this creates participation fatigue and slows progress unnecessarily. Establishing decision-making frameworks that match involvement levels to decision importance helps maintain engagement without overwhelming participants. When significant community input is needed, structured processes help generate more thoughtful outcomes than unstructured discussion alone. Approaches like deliberative forums provide balanced information about complex issues, present multiple perspectives, and create structured opportunities to consider trade-offs rather than simplistic solutions. These methods help communities move beyond polarized positions to find common ground and workable compromises. Transparency throughout the process builds trust and ownership. This includes communicating clearly about how input will influence decisions, providing access to relevant information in accessible formats, explaining the rationale behind final choices, and establishing feedback mechanisms for evaluating and potentially revising decisions based on implementation experience. Leadership development within communities creates sustainable impact beyond initial interventions. Community initiatives often suffer from over-reliance on a small number of established leaders, creating vulnerability if these key individuals burn out or move away. Deliberate leadership development expands the pool of people able to guide community efforts while ensuring leadership approaches match community values and needs. Effective community leadership development begins with expanding definitions of what leadership looks like beyond traditional models focused on positional authority or charismatic personalities. It recognizes diverse leadership styles, from visible public roles to behind-the-scenes coordination to specialized technical contributions, and values each for its unique contribution to community work. Practical development approaches include mentoring relationships between experienced and emerging leaders, creating graduated responsibility opportunities where people can try leadership roles with appropriate support, and establishing reflection practices where leaders discuss challenges and learnings in supportive environments. These methods help develop not just skills, but also the confidence and relationships necessary for effective community leadership. Shared leadership models distribute responsibilities among multiple people rather than concentrating them in single positions. This approach reduces individual burnout risk while bringing diverse perspectives and skills to leadership functions. It also creates leadership structures more resilient to individual transitions, as knowledge and relationships spread across multiple people rather than residing with single, irreplaceable leaders. The most effective community engagement approaches integrate these elements into cohesive systems rather than implementing them as isolated techniques. They recognize that inclusive participation generates more diverse assets for community use. Thoughtful conflict transformation strengthens relationships that support volunteer engagement. Clear decision-making processes develop leadership capacity throughout the community. These elements work together as an interconnected ecosystem rather than separate strategies. Building healthy community engagement represents an investment that yields returns across multiple dimensions. More effective solutions to shared problems, stronger social connections that support individual well-being, more equitable distribution of both responsibilities and benefits, and increased collective capacity to address future challenges. In a world facing increasingly complex problems requiring collaborative responses, these community engagement skills have never been more essential to our shared well-being and progress. The capacity to engage effectively in our communities relies on a fundamental personal skill that's often overlooked: the ability to be fully present with whatever we're experiencing. While community work happens externally through relationships and collective action, its foundation rests on our internal capacity for awareness and attention. This brings us to mindfulness and present moment awareness, practices that enhance our ability to engage fully with our experiences without being overwhelmed by them or automatically reacting to them. These approaches offer practical tools for navigating our increasingly distracted and high-speed world. Have you ever found yourself having a conversation while your mind was actually focused on your to-do list? Or noticed you drove somewhere with no memory of the journey because you were lost in thought? These common experiences reflect how frequently we operate on autopilot, physically present but mentally elsewhere. Mindfulness offers an alternative, the ability to intentionally pay attention to our current experience with openness and curiosity rather than judgment or distraction. Attention training practices strengthen the ability to maintain focus despite distractions. Our attention faces unprecedented challenges in the modern world. The average person checks their phone around 96 times daily. That's once every 15 minutes during waking hours. Each notification, email, or message fragment our attention, making sustained focus increasingly difficult. Attention training directly addresses this challenge by systematically strengthening our capacity to direct and maintain attention intentionally. Focused attention meditation provides a straightforward approach to developing this capacity. The practice typically involves selecting a single focus point, often the physical sensations of breathing, and returning attention to this anchor whenever the mind wanders. This simple but challenging exercise functions like a workout for attention, strengthening neural networks involved in focus and cognitive control through consistent practice. The process works because each time we notice our mind has wandered and deliberately return attention to our chosen focus, we strengthen specific attention networks in the brain. It's similar to how physical exercise strengthens muscles through repeated movement. Research using brain imaging shows that regular mindfulness practice actually changes brain structure and function in regions associated with attention regulation, with noticeable improvements typically emerging after 8 weeks of regular practice. While formal meditation provides concentrated attention training, informal practices integrate this training into daily activities. This might involve choosing routine actions, like washing dishes, walking, or eating, and performing them with full attention, rather than while multitasking or daydreaming. These everyday mindfulness practices help transfer attention skills from formal settings to practical life situations. Body awareness techniques connect individuals to physical sensations often overlooked in daily life. Our bodies constantly provide valuable information about our needs, emotions, and responses to situations, yet many people have limited awareness of these physical experiences. Cultivating body awareness creates a direct connection to present moment experience while providing early warning signals about stress, emotional reactions, or physical needs before they become overwhelming. The body scan meditation offers a systematic approach to developing this awareness. This practice involves moving attention sequentially through different body regions, noticing physical sensations without trying to change them. Practitioners often discover subtle tensions, discomfort, or pleasant sensations they hadn't previously recognized. Over time, this practice develops the ability to maintain awareness of physical experience even during challenging situations. Mindful movement practices like yoga, Tai Chi, or simple mindful walking integrate body awareness with motion. These approaches focus attention on the direct physical experience of movement, sensations of muscles engaging, balance shifting, and breath changing. Beyond their physical benefits, these practices develop the capacity to maintain present moment awareness during activity rather than only during still meditation. Interoception, awareness of internal bodily sensations like hunger, thirst, tension, or fatigue, represents a particularly valuable aspect of body awareness. Strengthening this capacity helps identify needs before they become urgent and recognize early signs of stress response. This awareness creates the opportunity to respond skillfully to these signals rather than ignoring them until they demand attention through discomfort or dysfunction. Emotional regulation is enhanced through non-judgmental observation of feelings as they arise. Emotions significantly influence our experiences and decisions, yet we often either suppress them or become completely identified with them. Mindfulness offers a middle path, acknowledging emotions fully while maintaining enough perspective to respond thoughtfully rather than react automatically. This approach involves recognizing emotions as they emerge, naming them specifically. I'm feeling frustrated, rather than just, I feel bad, and observing their physical manifestations in the body without immediately acting on them. This creates a crucial pause between emotional stimulus and response, allowing more skillful choices about how to express or address these feelings. The non-judgmental quality of this observation proves particularly important. Rather than labeling emotions as good or bad, mindfulness approaches them with curiosity and acceptance as natural human experiences. This doesn't mean approving of all emotional responses or their potential expressions, but rather acknowledging their presence without additional layers of self-criticism that often intensify difficult emotions. Research demonstrates that simply naming emotions activates regulatory brain regions and reduces activity in the amygdala, which processes emotional reactions. This name it to tame it effect helps explain why mindful emotional awareness provides more effective regulation than either suppression or unreflective expression. Regular practice strengthens this capacity, gradually transforming our relationship with challenging emotions from being overwhelmed by them to working skillfully with them. Cognitive flexibility develops through observing thoughts without automatic attachment or reaction. Our minds constantly generate thoughts, interpretations, judgments, plans, memories, and worries that significantly influence our experience. Without awareness, we typically identify completely with these thoughts, experiencing them as direct reality rather than as mental constructions that may or may not accurately reflect our situation. Mindfulness practices develop the ability to observe thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths. This perspective shift, sometimes described as seeing thoughts rather than seeing from thoughts, creates space between ourselves and our thinking. This space allows us to evaluate thoughts more objectively and choose which ones deserve further attention, rather than automatically believing or acting on whatever thoughts arise. Practical approaches to developing this capacity include briefly labeling thoughts as they occur, planning, judging, worrying, and visualizing thoughts as passing events rather than fixed realities, perhaps as clouds moving across the sky or leaves floating down a stream. These techniques help develop metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe our own thinking processes rather than being completely immersed in them. This cognitive flexibility particularly benefits us when facing difficult situations. When challenges arise, our minds often generate catastrophic interpretations, self-critical judgments, or ruminations about past mistakes. Mindfulness doesn't eliminate these thought patterns, but it creates the crucial ability to recognize them as thoughts rather than facts. This recognition allows us to respond based on the actual situation rather than our mind's potentially distorted interpretation of it. Compassion practices extend mindful awareness from self-experience to understanding others. While basic mindfulness develops attention to our own experience, compassion practices deliberately expand this awareness to include recognition of others' experiences and needs. These practices counterbalance our natural self-focus by cultivating genuine care for others' well-being alongside our own. Loving-kindness meditation represents one structured approach to developing this capacity. The practice typically begins with offering good wishes to oneself, then gradually extends these wishes to others, from loved ones to neutral acquaintances to difficult people and eventually all beings. Common phrases include wishes for safety, health, happiness, and ease, though practitioners often personalize these to feel most meaningful. Research shows these practices produce measurable changes in both emotional experience and behavior. Regular compassion meditation increases positive emotions toward others, reduces implicit bias, and enhances pro-social behavior like helping and sharing. Neuroimaging studies demonstrate increased activity in brain regions associated with empathy and positive emotions, suggesting these practices create lasting changes in how we relate to others. Self-compassion, extending the same care to ourselves that we would offer a good friend, forms an essential complement to compassion for others. Many people find it easier to feel compassion for others while maintaining harsh self-judgment. Self-compassion practices address this imbalance by cultivating a kind, understanding attitude toward our own struggles and imperfections. Rather than fostering self-indulgence as some fear, research shows self-compassion actually increases personal responsibility and motivation for self-improvement. Integration of mindfulness into daily activities transforms routine experiences into opportunities for presence. While formal meditation practices develop foundational skills, mindfulness ultimately becomes most valuable when integrated throughout daily life. This integration transforms ordinary experiences, from commuting to conversations to household chores, into opportunities for presence rather than activities to rush through on autopilot. This practical application begins with identifying transition moments in daily routines that can serve as mindfulness reminders. The moment before starting the car, entering a building, or beginning a meal can become a brief pause to establish present moment awareness. Some people use environmental cues like ringing phones or red traffic lights as signals to take a conscious breath and reconnect with the present moment. Mindful communication represents a particularly valuable daily application. This involves bringing full attention to conversations, listening completely rather than planning what to say next, noticing physical sensations and emotions that arise during interactions, and speaking from present awareness rather than automatic reactivity. These qualities transform ordinary exchanges, creating space for deeper understanding and more authentic connection. Even routine activities like eating, walking, or cleaning become opportunities for mindfulness when approached with full attention. Mindful eating involves noticing the sensory experience of food, tastes, textures, aromas, rather than consuming meals while distracted. Mindful walking focuses on the physical sensations of movement rather than rushing to destinations lost in thought. These approaches don't require additional time, but rather a different quality of attention to activities we're already doing. The benefits of integrated mindfulness extend beyond the moments of practice themselves. Research shows that people who maintain mindfulness throughout daily activities report lower stress levels, greater life satisfaction, and improved relationships compared to those who practice formal meditation but remain on autopilot during daily life. This integration allows mindfulness to transform our overall relationship with experience rather than serving as an isolated stress reduction technique. Mindfulness ultimately offers practical tools for living more fully in our increasingly distracted world. Rather than a specialized spiritual practice or relaxation technique, it represents a fundamental human capacity for aware presence that can be systematically developed. Through attention training, body awareness, emotional observation, cognitive flexibility, compassion cultivation, and daily life integration, mindfulness practices help us engage more directly with our actual experiences rather than being constantly pulled into rumination about the past or worry about the future. This capacity for presence serves as the foundation for everything else we do, from personal relationships to work performance to community engagement, allowing us to bring our full selves to the moments that make up our lives.